Hello, this is the weekly horoscope forecast for the Chronosight with Jinjabi Al Sol. Let's start with the story in early November, from November 1 to 15, 2025. Between late October and mid-November, some of the most powerful and impressive overall structures of the year are not just a few isolated constellations, but a continuous flow. Jupiter and Saturn are about to form a trine. As Jupiter begins its retrograde motion, the phenomenon of precession, meaning this particular structure in which the planets are gradually moving away from each other without being able to form a triangle in the middle, is occurring. On October 29th and 30th, Mars approaches and transmits Jupiter's light to Saturn, forming a kind of configuration known as the Weighing Grand or Grand Train Triangle, which is currently continuing. So, in the midst of all that, there are quite a lot of planetary outages happening throughout November. That said, there is a Mercury retrograde stop in early November, followed just 2 days later by a Jupiter retrograde stop. So, because so many structures that are considered powerful in astrology are coming together and happening now, in fact, what I'm talking about today is that if it happens at a very everyday level, it's a good thing, but it's not, because very big events happen at the group or national level, so the things that happen around me in my daily life seem like nothing, and I don't know if this is a positive or negative effect, but such things can happen. The first structure to appear is between November 1st and 2nd, specifically the planet Mercury, in Scorpio, Dschubba and Acrab. I don't know how many times Shuva has come over, and Acrab is an exclusive alpha star in its own righteous position, and compared to the royal star Antal, it has a little less name value and power than the other star in my Akrabu. So in a way, Dschubba-Acrab is closer to a miscellaneous star, but it's because these are attached to each other and are attached within 1 degree, and there are no other significant stars between 0 and 10 degrees in the early stages of the Ipma Palace. So they are used like this often. So this structure works from the morning of the 1st to the 3rd. It's like, because of some past misdeeds or shady actions you feel guilty about, you're afraid someone has leverage over you. Or maybe no one actually does. But you yourself think, oh, if someone brings this up, I'm screwed. You know, that kind of vague, nagging fear. It can make a person become timid and shrink away. So the actual facts of the situation no longer matter. All that's left is the fact that the person is intimidated. This happens quite often, and you can find yourself in a very awkward predicament because of it. Or it could be for all sorts of petty reasons. Not for some grand cause, but for reasons you'd be too embarrassed to say out loud. You know, when it comes to lending and borrowing money, these kinds of messy situations always come up. Money problems are like that, aren't they? So, for these kinds of embarrassing or uncomfortable reasons, you might find yourself getting frustrated because you simply can't get your money back as quickly as you would like. In other words, collections of payments get delayed or debt repayments are postponed. Things like that can happen from time to time. Now, on the same day or the next, this is the most favorable alignment of the first week of November. Venus forms a conjunction with Spica, and right after it squares Jupiter, Jupiter in Cancer. It's a structure where Jupiter in Cancer receives a direct square. Well, Venus seeing Spica naturally means it gains rulership in Libra, but at this degree, Venus also gains term. And what about Jupiter? Jupiter is originally an exaltation in Cancer, right? But in this 24 to 25 degree range, it also gains term. So that's one major dignity plus term. As you continue with your clinical practice, you'll find this combination really stabilizes a situation. Even if a typhoon is raging right next to it, it won't be shaken. It's like a roly-poly toy, it won't fall over. So it makes the matter itself, the one the significator is in charge of, very, very stable. Rulership and exaltation are major dignities, so that goes without saying, but term, which is also called bound, is very important. The meaning of the term is that it enters into its own territory, and no matter how much criticism or negative feedback it receives from others, or what happens on the outside, it still continues to do its job as intended. For example, it's like this. At home, he's a violent head of the household, maybe gambles sometimes, hits his wife, a very pre-modern kind of patriarch, a father. But at work, he is absolutely diligent and precise. No matter how much criticism he gets for his personality, his relationships, or his family life, when it comes to his job or his role in society, there's nothing to fault him for. So no matter how bad he is or seems to have a screw loose, as the head of the household, he fulfills his role. That's what term means. Even if there are problems in other areas, he at least acts like a decent person, and since he supports his family without fail, you can't bring yourself to say you want a divorce. I mean, nowadays you'd probably get a divorce, but anyway, it's a somewhat pre-modern analogy. In the old days, no matter how flawed his character was, if he supported his family and did his job diligently, people would say, well, that's what a man's supposed to do. There was that kind of thinking. But, descriptions of things like term were written in that pre-modern era, so that's the kind of logic they follow. So, even if there are other considerable problems, because he fulfills his role, you can't argue with it. The whole structure doesn't collapse. That's the meaning of term or bound. Anyway, the structure right now, with Venus and Jupiter forming a square on November 2nd, is exactly like that. It has major dignity and it also has term. And Venus is even conjunct the royal star Spica. I mean, there's nothing more to say. So this is in effect from October 31st to the morning of November 6th. Now, the moderation is perfect. Why? Because while Venus is willful, Jupiter, which is holding it down with a direct square, is completely by the book. So it's a joyous event that proceeds with perfect moderation, without a single flaw. Something worth congratulating someone for. So getting married at a time like this would be really great. Right, and it just so happens the first is a Saturday, is that right? The first is a Saturday and the second is a Sunday. So, for people who scheduled their wedding for the 1st or 2nd, I mean, they've totally hit the jackpot. Of course, there are some bad parts too. Mercury and Saturn form a complete conjunction by degree at this time, so that part is a bit of a problem, but when is there ever a perfect time? So, this is a good configuration that you really don't get to see very often. So, it will be especially good for those whose Time Lord is Venus, and those with Jupiter as their Time Lord will also have a lot to gain. So what can happen at this time is receiving favors from good and capable people around you with no strings attached. The no strings attached part is important. So because you've received a pure favor, not bound by any formal contract, you may feel a sense of gratitude, but you have no formal obligation to repay that favor. Isn't that beautiful? This idea of a favor with no strings attached between people, but favors with no strings attached also come when one is well off. Now there is one issue here. Venus is too strong right now. Because Venus itself is so powerful, what's the biggest difference between Venus and Jupiter? It's that one is a nocturnal planet and the other is a diurnal planet. Because Venus is a nocturnal planet, it tries to do as it pleases, whereas Jupiter, being a diurnal planet, adheres to discipline and rules. But right now, Jupiter is in a situation where it's predominating Venus. In reality, Jupiter's decision-making authority should take precedence. But Venus, looking at Spica, gets caught up in its own vanity, thinking, I'm strong, I'm beautiful, and acts on a whim, crossing the line Jupiter has drawn. If that happens, all that goodwill vanishes in an instant. So, at a time like this, you absolutely must not break promises or act on a whim. You can't change your mind saying things like, a week ago I thought that, but now this looks better. If you do, you could lose everything. So you just have to stick to that one thing. And Neptune, which has been retrograde, meets Scheat. It's been showing up so often this year. A purely malefic star, currently at 29 degrees, 43 minutes of Pisces. Scheat is about to move into Aries when they meet. Now, this conjunction is exact on November 4th, but it's very long. From October 7th, 2025 to February 4th, 2026. How many months is that? For 4 months, this Neptune-Scheat conjunction continues. Why? Why is that? On December 10th, Neptune, which was retrograde, turns direct, and that point is still within the effective conjunction range with Scheat. So Neptune will move forward at a damn slow speed. It goes direct, enters Aries again, and escapes Scheat's influence on February 5th, 2026. So for almost 4 months, Neptune and Scheat are within the effective conjunction range. For people who know, this is quite a structure. So this is a meeting of an outer planet and a fixed star, so it's less about personal matters and more about trends or campaigns at a group, national or societal level. By campaign, I don't mean a let's do something well campaign. It's more like a season of a TV show, season 1, season 2, season 3. This campaign is like season 1, season 2 of an operation. So, a 4-month unit of overall general flow, development, and progression. A general social atmosphere and mood will be led by the Neptune-Scheat combination. So psychotropic drugs and narcotics, well, they've gone to the extreme. Or highly addictive favorites like alcohol or cigarettes or tea or chocolate, things like that. These things, which should normally have restrictions, are exposed without any particular limits, leading to various accidents or social issues. These things can really flare up during these 4 months. Actually, there's a lot to say here. Over the past 3 or 4 years, haven't we all seen so many cases of elderly drivers causing absurd accidents and claiming it was sudden unintended acceleration? Of course, it could be that these incidents weren't reported as much before, but the bigger issue is this. You see, as you get older, your neural coordination starts to fail. Your brain is sure it pressed button A, but your limbs end up pressing button B. It's like with the accelerator and the brake. You're certain you hit the brake, but your foot was actually on the accelerator. So this is partly an unavoidable aspect of neural aging, but there are things that accelerate it. What are they? Psychotropic drugs, or medications used for the nervous system. So-called sleeping pills like zolpidem, or tranquilizers, anticonvulsants, antidepressants. All of these restrict neural synapses to some degree. Whether this will have a major impact that disrupts daily life, even the prescribing doctors and scientists don't really know. Not yet. But there is one thing everyone can agree on. So for elderly patients whose coordination is already poor, when you introduce these psychotropic drugs that affect neural synapses, the synapses get even more jumbled. This means proper reflexes don't fire correctly. So you end up in a situation where you think you hit the brake, but you actually hit the accelerator. And there's another thing. There are drugs used for the nervous system, so-called nerve blockers, that relieve pain, have an anesthesia-like effect, or you know how older people often have to use the restroom at night? It's called nocturia. For men it's often due to an enlarged prostate, and for women it can be a weakening of the bladder. Women have a shorter urethra, anatomically. Only about 3 to 4 centimeters. A man's, on the other hand, is longer as it passes through the corpus cavernosum of the penis. So because of the length of the urethra, men can actually hold their urine a bit longer than women. To put it another way, when a woman's bladder is too full, it's very difficult to hold it in. So, for various reasons, nocturia becomes a problem. And if you're suffering from nocturia and can't sleep at night, that's not good. So they prescribe things like nerve blockers. The idea is to make it so you don't feel the urge to urinate as much while you're sleeping. But the problem is, it would be fine if it only acted there. But it's an oral medication. You take it by mouth. Do you think it only affects the bladder, prostate, or urinary tract? Of course not. It affects the entire body. So, for people who are already taking other psychotropic drugs, if they add this one to the mix, their neural coordination really suffers. And that's how they get into accidents. But this issue isn't really being brought to light right now. In my case, back when I was in graduate school, I majored in neuroscience. So in fields like cognitive neuroscience, when you look at pharmaceuticals, you'll find there are many truly dangerous things. Everyone, but in our country, the medical system itself is what's called a fee-for-service system. So patients can get a hospital consultation whenever they want, which leads to an overabundance of medication. So if you look at the elderly, they take medicine by the handful. I'm not joking. The number of pills they take in a day can be around 20 or 30. It's surprising, isn't it? And they take that every single day. There's no center that can control this right now. because it's a fee-for-service system. In places like the UK, which uses a capitation system, a single primary care physician can control this. Of course, over there you have to wait over 8 months for a consultation, and it's a really awful environment, but all medical systems have their pros and cons. In our country's case, the problem is excessive medical care, and as for excessive medication, well, that goes without saying. Anyone who's lived abroad will know this. You get a cold, wait for 5 days, and finally see your primary care physician, only for them to prescribe vitamin C and send you on your way. They'll say, "You'll get better soon, and since there are no signs of a serious secondary infection, you don't need antibiotics. I don't prescribe anti-inflammatories, so just go buy them at the drugstore next door." That's how it is. So it's an atmosphere where they have no choice but to minimize medication, but our country is the complete opposite. I've gone off on a tangent, but this Neptune-Scheat conjunction can maximize these kinds of chronic medical malpractices in our country. It's like the maximized damage effect in Diablo. If it triggers just right, it deals 5 times the damage. And people will die at 5 times the rate. So those kinds of incidents can keep happening and become a major issue. So that's an aspect we can keep an eye on. Besides that, Scheat itself is very weak to water. Or rather than weak, it's deeply connected to water-related disasters. So the likelihood of water-related accidents or disasters like shipwrecks, drownings, tsunamis, heavy rain and floods increases. But conversely, during these 4 months of the Neptune-Scheat conjunction, there are industries that will benefit. Entertainment, alcohol, luxury goods, and in the pharmaceutical industry, companies that make things like painkillers, anesthetics, anti-inflammatories and nerve blockers, they can hit the jackpot. So they can discover a niche market that others haven't seen and make a huge profit. So people working in these fields can expect to hit it big. Well, if someone is losing out, there's always someone else gaining somewhere. The world is inherently unfair, so don't feel too wronged by it. Okay, and the next day, Mars forms an opposition with Uranus. But Uranus meets it exactly on November 30th, and from early October to early November, this conjunction of Uranus and Alcyone, because they move slowly when they meet with a planet, it lasts for a very long time. So since they're in the zone of influence, if you think about it, yes, Uranus, Alcyone, and Mars are meeting. Because these three ticking time bombs are meeting, a truly terrible accident could happen. So this will be in effect from November 3rd to the morning of the 7th. A terrible disaster related to vehicles, things like cars, bicycles, electric scooters, trains, ships, aircraft. The type doesn't matter. If an accident does happen, it could be a very big one. And also for anything, whether it's people or things, it's about unpredictable and bizarre troubles that occur while in transit. What does this mean? It means very unfortunate cases that wouldn't normally happen. These kinds of troubles can arise, causing travel disruptions, damage, or injury. And also, because this happens on the Gemini-Sagittarius axis, it relates to the mental realm. So things like irreconcilable ideological conflicts, like a clash between the far right and the far left. That kind of thing can happen, and because of it, a visible dispute or incident could occur. We can consider that aspect. Okay, and just 4 days later, Mars moves after Mercury and meets with Dschubba and Acrab, which Mercury just recently passed. Okay, this will be in effect from the 8th to the morning of the 10th. Now, during this time, sports and leisure activities where large groups of people cause a nuisance to others can become a big issue. For example, the so-called running crews that have become popular since last year. Everyone's running, right? But the problem is they form these large groups and act as if they have exclusive rights to public spaces, like they own them. I don't know why it is that a person who is perfectly fine as an individual becomes an idiot when they're in a group. I mean, their thinking, ethics, decision-making, and judgment tend to become idiotic when they're in a group. But this is one of the limitations of Homo sapiens. So, as an individual, they might be outstanding, admirable, and someone to look up to, but when they join a group, they become a fool. So, in this way, or this is also an old problem, but because they're allowed to park their RVs in public parking lots, they start using the space as if it's their own private campground. or they prevent others from parking there if they don't have an RV, or they block off the area even though they have no authority to do so. This kind of idiotic mindset where they believe they acquire illegal rights just by occupying a space, things like that can emerge. So that kind of thing, the tendency for Homo sapiens to become foolish in a group, their intelligence seems to drop. These kinds of problems can become major issues at this time. Okay, besides that, there's what's called debt vesting, credit trading. It's like margin trading at a brokerage, where you use leverage. My money, I might have put in 30 million won, but I'm trading with 100 million won. But then a major accident happens, and you get what's called a few days ago, what happened in the crypto market a while ago, the liquidations, forced liquidations. Things like that can emerge as more serious social problems during this period. Now that I'm talking about it, these are some pretty scary things. Okay, and the next day, yes, you see the R symbol appear, right? Mercury goes into retrograde. It stations. This happens on the 11th. It will be in effect from November 5th to the 15th. Now, this time feels like a precursor to important events. There's some very heavy news coming from overseas, and it makes your heart pound. So it hasn't hit just yet, but it will someday, and it feels like it's coming soon. Usually at times like this, it's a bit scary, isn't it? You feel afraid, anxious. That kind of atmosphere can form. Okay, and for those whose Time Lord or personal significator is Mercury, in universally important life matters like finances, career, health, and moving, you may experience the most impactful and significant changes within a 6-month period before and after. Okay, and just 2 days later, as I mentioned earlier, Jupiter gets an R symbol, yes? Jupiter also, just 2 days apart, stations and goes into retrograde. It's been a long wait. Okay, this structure is in effect from November 5th to the 19th. Now, during this time, because of excessive wealth or prosperity that's beyond your means, it's a bit good. I mean, the feeling is good, but there's also this subtle anxiety like, is this really okay? It can be a time when that kind of unease coexists. Okay, if I speak about this specifically, it could be controversial, so I'll just speak metaphorically. Okay, there's a beating we have to take eventually. There's a bubble that has to burst someday, but a very foolish decision to postpone that for about a year could be made at this time. So, it's like a steroid rebound. Let's say there's a problem, and you have a severe skin condition that's really itchy, but you don't know the cause, and the patient is like, I'm dying, it's so itchy. So, for a quick fix, you administer steroids, whether it's oral or topical. Now, the problem is steroids are immunosuppressants. The reason this person is itching with that stinging, maddening itch is because there's an immune response. But this immune response, while it can sometimes be unnecessary, like in autoimmune diseases, usually has a reason. The immune response is happening because it's supposed to. But steroids just suppress the immune response regardless of the consequences. So, it makes the existing inflammation seem like it's not there. That's why if you use steroids, you feel better for a little while. The itching goes away, but the root cause is still there. That's why as soon as you stop taking steroids, a rebound occurs. The itching returns, and side effects of steroids like a buffalo hump, moon face, and venous stasis, all these things start to appear. So this steroid rebound is very well known in the medical field, and some of you may have even experienced it. But this phenomenon isn't just limited to the human body. You see, when you're supposed to take a hit, you should take it. If you postpone it, it comes back much bigger later. The bomb gets bigger. It's like a snowball rolling and getting bigger. Anyway, I'll stop this story here. And of course, for those whose Time Lord or personal significator is Jupiter, you might experience changes in universally important matters like wealth, career, health, and moving. And then, the next day, Mars catches up to Mercury, which has just started its retrograde, and they form a conjunction as Mars passes by. This is on November 13th. It happens on the morning of November 13th. Why do I remember the exact time for this? It's because they meet right at the exact start time of the 2025 College Scholastic Ability Test. So because of that, I posted something about it separately. So the ascendant The ascendant of this year's CSAT is this Mercury-Mars conjunction. This year's CSAT will be quite something to watch. So if you're interested, you can visit the cafe or blog where I'm active and see what it's about. So things become very urgent, like your butt is on fire. A problem arises that must be solved in a short amount of time. It happens suddenly. There's no warning. So people who were just going about their daily routines suddenly enter an unexpected time attack mode. What do they call this at work, especially in game companies? Entering crunch mode. Suddenly you have to work late, all night, late, all night. That kind of thing suddenly happens and people panic, not knowing what to do. But then at some point the situation is resolved by external factors. Not too long after. Why? Because Mercury is in retrograde and Mars is moving forward, they pass each other in an instant. So at some point it's not something I created and it's not something I ended. I didn't start it or finish it, but a situation arose due to some external problem and then it suddenly gets cleared up. So everyone is just drained and dazed, kind of mentally out of it. That kind of situation can happen. Of course, this is an issue that can apply to everyone whose Time Lord is Mercury or Mars. Alright, that concludes the Chronosight Weekly Horoscope for early November of 2025. Thank you.